From the City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, it's one of those classic Coast to Coast shows as we're going to the Bigfoot capital of the world, Willow Creek, California, to talk about Bigfoot. And later, the beast of Boggy Creek. That'll be a few hours after. Get ready. Here's what's happening. Mitt Romney sweeping all 5 Republican primary elections tonight, putting an end once and for all to any hopes for a comeback by his GOP primary opponents. He is setting the stage for a November runoff with President Barack Obama. Stand by for more. A BP engineer intentionally deleted more than 300 text messages that said the company's efforts to control the Gulf of Mexico oil spill were failing, and that the amount of oil leaking was far more than what the company was reporting. In the first criminal charges related to the deadly explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig, which happened in April of 2010, the Justice Department has arrested Kurt Mix, charging him with 2 counts of obstruction of justice for destroying evidence sought by federal authorities. Captain Kelly Sweeney with us, and of course you know Kelly has monitored this case all through its history. Kelly, did you expect something like this?
Ahoy, George. It's great being back with you and all the Coast listeners, and yes, I did, but we should remember one thing. This guy did not cause the disaster.
No.
He's being charged for actions which occurred weeks after the explosion. But the charge indicates, as you pointed out, that BP knew that their efforts for controlling the spill were not working and that more was spilling into the Gulf than they admitted to the government. Now, if it turns out that this guy is convicted and BP was found to have purposely withheld that information, then charges will go all the way up to the highest echelons of the company executives, George.
And they should, Kelly.
They darn well should. And in addition, under international maritime law, employees of Transocean, which owned the rig itself, can be charged with the deaths of those 11 men.
All right, very good. Thank you, Kelly. All right, get ready for this one. The United States Department of Agriculture has confirmed the nation's 4th case of mad cow disease, found in a dairy cow in California. The animal has been euthanized. The carcass is being held under state authority at a rendering facility here in California. Will be destroyed, of course. Though eating contaminated meat or other animal products from cattle with BSE thought to be the cause of a fatal brain disease in humans, the cow was never presented for slaughter, and milk does not transmit BSE, in case you're worried about that. Well, no one can accuse the Heart Attack Grill of false advertising. A woman collapsed into unconsciousness at the Las Vegas restaurant while eating a double bypass burger, drinking a margarita, smoking a cigarette. The customer was the second in just over 2 months to collapse at the restaurant while eating one of the famed burgers, named after various forms of cardiac arrest. Back in February, another customer was caught on video being carted out by paramedics after suffering a heart attack while eating a quadruple bypass burger. Home prices dropping again in February in the most major cities for a 6th straight month, a sign that the modest gains haven't been enough to boost sales. The steepest declines in Atlanta, Chicago, Cleveland, prices rising in Phoenix, San Diego, and Miami, unchanged in Dallas. Registered investment advisor Mish Shedlock with us here. Still not out of the woods yet with the housing market, Mish.
No, not out of the woods at all, George, but housing is one of the few things that I'm actually starting to get a little bit bullish on. Home prices are now back to 2002 levels, and that's in nominal terms. If we adjust for inflation, say the price of food, the price of gas, we're now back to 1998 levels. Maybe some places have some room to fall. There's some places that probably already have bottomed. However, the caveat, there's always one, though, right, George, is to take advantage of this, you need to have a job, which is, not easy to get now, and you need to not already have a house.
That's right.
So those are the 2 things. But even once home prices bottom, I want to caution people, there's still right now. 2 million homes in foreclosure. Those are going to come on the market. There's another 1.5 million, actually 1.6 million homes that are 90 days delinquent or more. So there's upside pressures that are going to cap these home prices, but we're in the bottoming stage right now. That's a good thing, George.
All right, Mish, thank you so much. To spy or not to spy on your teen on Facebook, that's a question for many parents, and most seem to be okay with it. According to a new survey, 60% of the parents in the United States of teenagers seem okay looking into their kids' social accounts without their knowledge. And moms are most likely to be the ones doing the spying. The information comes from a security software company which surveyed 4,400 parents with children ages 14 to 17 in 11 countries. American parents aren't alone in the snooping, but they seem to be more aggressive about Facebook. Globally, only 44% of all parents said they spy on their teens' Facebook accounts. Details emerging of a plan by billionaire entrepreneurs to mine asteroids for their resources. The multi-million-dollar plan would use robotic spacecraft to squeeze chemical components of fuel and minerals such as platinum and gold out of rocks. The founders include film director and explorer James Cameron, who's been on the program, as well as Google's chief executive Larry Page and its executive chairman Eric Schmidt. They even aim to create a fuel depot in space by 2020. Head of the EnterpriseMission.com and our science advisor, Richard C. Hoagland here. Is this going to work, Richard?
You know, George, this is like an early birthday present.
For you?
Yep. About a century ago, during the Civil War, remember, Abraham Lincoln initiated the Transcontinental Railway. And it has been said that before the railway, the United States was impossible, and after the railway, the United States was inevitable.
That's right.
What these guys did this morning was to kick off what I will call the second age of space. This is like Kennedy all over again, except this time we're going to stay, because the bottom line of what motivates a lot of human beings is, how do you make money? How do you make a living? And up until now, except for communication satellites and some very expensive tourist junkets, you haven't been able to make a living in space. This technology curve, this plan, this projection that they laid out at that 2-hour press conference was fascinating, because it's all doable, it's all with current technology, it's all with very smart and very, very rich people, and the game plan they're laying out for us is going to be transparent, because the technology, they emphasized this morning, is going to be made available to all the rest of us. Can you imagine what Enterprise and I could do with a couple of these satellites to go and look for artifacts in the solar system?
Amazing. But how do they know they can find like platinum and gold on an asteroid?
Because you use spectral analysis, remote sensing. We've been doing it for 100 years with telescopes. What they're planning to do is to actually send a fleet of little spacecraft, just like my departed friend Kraft Ericke recommended 30, 40 years ago. I mean, this is such an echo of Kraft Ericke's brilliant idea for inheriting the riches of the solar system. We need, George, to do a whole program on this with probably people like Jerry Pournelle, because this is the beginning of the civilian democratization of what's out there, and you know what they're going to ultimately find, right?
Oh, everything. Richard, that's a great story. We'll do that. And also, by the way, happy birthday for tomorrow, my friend. Richard C. Hoagland, EnterpriseMission.com. Now, you may have heard a new voice on Coast to Coast over the last several weeks. Let me tell you a little bit about Dick Urvasti. This guy has been drumming for rock bands at the age of 13, and he's now the newest member of the Coast to Coast AM family. I want you to hear Dick, hear his story. He's with us, and he's going to be with us for a long, long time. Dick, we're so happy to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, doing pretty well tonight, George. How's it going out in California?
Good. And you're up in one of my old staunching grounds of Minneapolis. I lived there back in 78.
Oh, is that right?
Worked at the KSDP for a year or so.
Oh, it's big 1500.
Yep.
Sure.
And then off I went to St. Louis. But tell us about you, Dick.
Well, like you say, I'm a musician, really kind of in my heart of hearts. But if you can imagine how difficult it is now to have a career as a musician, it was still even kind of difficult back in 1975. And my brother, Tom, went to a radio school here in the Twin Cities. Back then it was called Brown Institute. And he was musically inclined and ended up getting a radio station gig at WCKL in Catskill, New York. And so I just followed in his footsteps.
You've got great pipes.
Well, thank you.
Now, did you always have this voice even when you were like 12 years old?
Yeah, it didn't happen as quickly as our dear departed friend Don LaFontaine claims happened to him overnight. It happened to me over a summertime.
Good old Don, in a perfect world.
Oh, he did.
Hey, Dick, we're going to be talking to you more, but I just wanted everybody who has been affiliated with this program for so many years just to hear you and welcome you aboard, and we just look forward to many years with you.
Well, I thank you for the privilege. Really appreciate it, George. I used to be a nighttime radio announcer in the Midwest, various places, and of course, radio at all day parts is about relationships, but especially at night because listeners are just so very attentive and very loyal, and I consider this a privilege.
Super. Dick Hravosti, and you're going to hear more of Dick's voice during all our programs on Coast to Coast AM. You know, as I was reporting last week, chin implants are now the fastest growing cosmetic surgery procedure. People in the thousands are getting chin implants. But did you know there are many botched surgeries and very strange plastic surgeries? We're talking about that next on Coast to Coast AM. You will shake your head when you hear about some of these plastic surgery stories. Dr. Tony Yoon is a board-certified plastic surgeon. Tony made his national television debut on Dr. 90210 and has been a frequent guest on The Rachel Ray Show. Tony is now a regular columnist on CNN. He has written articles, his book, In Stitches. He was on with me about a year ago. Here he is back on Coast to Coast. Tony, how are you?
Great, George. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. You know, it is amazing how many botched surgeries, whether it's plastic surgery or just conventional surgery, that are happening all over the place. People who go in to have a leg removed and they take the wrong one or the wrong kidney. How do these things happen, Tony?
Well, it's because doctors and nurses are all human. So there are definitely mistakes that are made, and there's been numerous news reports about the amount of medical mistakes that are made in the hospitals. And hospitals are actually trying to clamp down on it. I know the hospital I work at, if we operate on a body part, they make us actually write the patient's name or our name on that body part so that we know we're taking the right side off. The correct side off, I suppose, is a better way to say it.
And we're going to be talking about some plastic surgeries and mention a few names or so, and I want everyone to know they are not Tony's patients. He may have heard stories about them, but there's that doctor-patient confidentiality. Tell me about Cher's rib removal. Did that happen?
Well, there's all these urban legends in plastic surgery, and so one of them was that there's this urban legend that Cher had ribs removed to make her waist thinner. And it's something that has, been a story that has been going on for years and years. Now, Cher has denied it, but it is actually a real procedure. It's very, very unusual. It's nothing that most plastic surgeons have ever seen or done, but there are some people typically who undergo gender reassignment. They change their gender, and it is kind of this crazy surgery that some people undergo.
Is it dangerous?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because your ribs are right on top of your lungs, and one false move when you're removing a rib and you can puncture a person's lung. And that's why this isn't a typical surgery that plastic surgeons do.
I thought that Adam and Eve only did the rib thing.
You're right on that one, but it is something that is more commonly done outside the United States because it's definitely on the fringe. Most plastic surgeons in the U.S. would cringe thinking about doing that type of procedure.
We are who we are. Our genetics from our parents. My dad was about 5'8", and I'm 5'11". On my mother's side, they were taller, so I got that height from them. But a lot of people are doing strange things to get taller, aren't they?
Yes, and this is a true surgery that in orthopedic surgery we've learned that if you break a person's bone and you put it, let's say you separate it about 1 millimeter a day, new bone will actually develop at about 1 millimeter a day, and people are using this principle to actually make people taller. So we used it in accidents where people may have bone that is crushed, and if you put the bone together and then gradually separate it, and it's pretty simple. You put a couple of spikes in the bone, and then you literally turn a lever.
Ouch.
Literally a millimeter a day, you can create new bone, and it literally causes people to become taller.
How many inches would someone grow or appear to grow?
Some people, there are reports that people have grown 4 to 6 inches with this type of procedure.
Amazing.
Now, this is very, very fringe. It's typically done more in Europe. There are reports of it being done in Germany, but there is a orthopedic surgeon or two in the United States that's actually performing the surgery. And it's very, very painful. Very few people undergo it, but it actually works.
You know, some people, like the late Michael Jackson, God rest his soul, there was a point that, Tony, where, you know, I thought he looked pretty good. But then
around the time of Thriller.
And then he went too far. I mean, then he looked almost like a mannequin. What possesses someone to do that? Or why doesn't the plastic surgeon say, Michael, enough is enough, we're not doing anymore?
Well, there's two things involved here. So Michael obviously had a psychiatric issue, and the issue that most plastic surgeons believe he had is called BDD, or body dysmorphic disorder. And this is a very strange but actually kind of common psychiatric condition where you look in the mirror and you see something different than everybody else sees. So whereas somebody may have a small bump on the nose, to them, when they look in the mirror, that bump is the size of Mount Rushmore. And so they undergo these multiple surgeries to try to correct a defect that was never really there in the first place. Interestingly enough, with Michael Jackson, I used to work out in Beverly Hills. I wrote about some of that in my book In Stitches. But I used to work out there, and one of my employees used to work in an office where they reportedly, allegedly worked on Michael Jackson. And the story that I heard was that he would show up, that they would get a check from Michael Jackson Productions every month or two for anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000.
My gosh!
Yeah, every couple of months. Interestingly enough, his plastic surgeon, the one that I heard was his, actually ended up in an insane asylum several years ago. And back a few years ago, he actually ran for president against Barack Obama. Now, nobody heard about this because he wasn't part of the big parties, but this was Michael Jackson's surgeon. So you could kind of understand, you know, what would possess somebody to do surgery like this. I mean, his surgeon was crazy in and of himself.
What happens, Tony, in some of these plastic surgeries where it just doesn't seem to work? I mean, the person's worse than when he went in. What happens?
Typically, it's surgery that's overdone. And what happens is that patients will come in all the time asking us for procedures that just aren't realistic. So I get patients all the time asking me to look a certain way or to do a procedure, and their expectations are so out of whack that you do it. You know, if oftentimes patients can even trick you. You know, I get patients that will say, "Oh, I understand that this is what I should expect, but I want this and that." And it can really go wrong very quickly. Plus, there are a lot of plastic surgeons out there that are doing procedures that they just shouldn't be. You know, it's just the almighty dollar. Insurance is not paying like it used to. And unfortunately, some doctors throw morality out the window and morals out the window, and they'll do whatever you ask them to do if you pay them.
What about the story of a Beverly Hills cosmetic surgeon who would not only do liposuction on people, but would then keep the fat that he sucked out of them and use it as a biofuel for his car?
This is an interesting story. It was a radiologist who worked out in Beverly Hills, and he claimed that he would actually use his patients' liposuction fat to power his car. And he would claim that he would drive to work every day with it. Well, eventually the authorities actually shut his practice down, and he fled to South America, where he's still hiding out somewhere in the jungles of Brazil, is my understanding.
I mean, what did he do wrong? I mean, is that wrong to put, you know, fat in your car, or was he doing other things?
It's a biohazard, and so now he claims, and there's no evidence that this was actually true, but he claimed that his car was specially made to burn this fat. Well, you know, as you know, we have exhaust that comes out of our exhaust pipe. If you have human fat that's getting burned and the exhaust is coming out of your exhaust pipe, what type of viruses are in that?
That's a good point.
Overall, it's a biohazard. Now, it's never been proven that he actually did it, but he had a website claiming that this is exactly what he did, and he fled the country.
Tony, we're going to come back with you in just a moment. Tony's website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Some people are out there, they want elf ears, if you can believe it. People are getting plastic surgery done on your pets. We're going to be talking with Tony about that. We'll take some of your calls as well. Maybe you've got some horrendous stories you want to share with us. I'm George Norrie, and we will be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And if you need to contact me, that's George at coasttocoastam.com. Well, next hour, we are going to Bigfoot country to talk about some current Bigfoot cases. Then later on, we talk about the strange beast known out there in Boggy Creek. So make sure you're part of that program. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie. We're with plastic surgeon Dr. Tony Yoon as we talk about botched plastic surgeries and strange plastic surgeries. Tony, elf ears?
Yeah, this is an interesting phenomenon. There's a doctor actually in New York City who's reshaping the cartilage of the ears of young people, and he claims that it causes people to enhance their listening experience when they listen to music. And there are parties actually out in New York City where you have to have elf ears to actually go to these kind of rave-like parties. And it's all very underground.
How weird. Why don't they just go buy an elf ear kit and just stick it on their ears?
A lot easier.
My gosh.
A lot easier than spending the rest of your life looking like Spock.
I mean, how pointy do the ears go?
Oh, you can make them very pointy because literally you're just shaping the cartilage and cutting it into a different shape. And definitely this is a very strange occurrence. There's no real scientific proof that it would make your listening experience any better, but there is this phenomenon called body transmogrification where people will do these procedures to their body. Typically it's non-doctors that are doing it, people who are splitting their tongues to give themselves a forked tongue.
Like a reptilian tongue.
Exactly. People who are having implants of various metal implants placed into their body, like spikes, kind of like the old Frankenstein, where you'd have these bolts sticking out of his body. There are people who are having those inserted into their bodies, typically without any anesthetic, because the people who do these procedures are lay people. They're like tattoo parlor technicians who'll do it.
They
don't have any lidocaine or anesthetics to use.
Well, some people are getting like vampire teeth put on as crowns. I've heard that from dentists. Yeah, they're having their teeth shaped and kind of shaved down to look sharp. And these people are having these procedures. Typically, they're permanent procedures. I tell you, the crazy thing is, and I've seen it on TV and on news reports, people are splitting their tongues with literally they have a swig of whiskey, use some ice, and they literally have it cut while they're wide awake with no real anesthetic. Oh, my God. Now, how wide is the split in the tongue?
Oh, it's several centimeters, like an inch long.
Unbelievable.
And it's all done with no anesthetics at all, just some alcohol, some whiskey, and you squeeze something and they do it. I mean, this is happening all over the place. I've had patients of mine show up, and you look at them, and there's literally these spikes sticking out of their body, and it's not doctors that insert them. I mean, there's a risk of infection, and but this is going on in even small towns. Does the split tongue affect their speech? It can. Yeah, it can give somebody more of a lispy type of a speech. But bifurcating the tongue is a relatively common procedure in the body transmogrification, kind of the underworld of that. We're going to get into more of this, Tony, and some phone calls, but why do people do this to themselves? What is wrong with them? Well, I think we look at it in a lot of different ways. Back my parents, the thought for them of people putting tattoos on their body is crazy. Well, now you look at TV and people just on the street, and everybody's getting tattoos now. There are tattoos. People are tattooing all over their face. I had one patient come to see me, the ugliest tattoo I've ever seen. It was an actual heart, the ventricles of the heart, the aorta, the great vessels, and it was tattooed, very attractive young gal, right on the top of her chest. So she wore a shirt, and you could see the actual heart and the vessels. I mean, absolutely disgusting looking. And, there are people who are just, this is how they express themselves. And, I mean, who's to say what is extreme, I guess? And they're parents think that a guy getting an earring is extreme. Well, they're putting piercings in their nose, in their lips, in their tongues, right through their tongues. And you may have seen, too, some people with the gauge earrings, and these are the big hoops that don't hang from your ears, but they actually make your earlobes really, really wide and long. Yeah, that's very common now as well, and I've had to repair some people who've had those, and they've tried to get jobs, but they can't get a job because they look so, unusual.
What about people with plastic surgery being done on their pets?
Yeah, that's something that's been making news lately. I think that's more of a it's a very rare thing. Now, obviously, there are Shar-Peis and other dogs like that do have issues with excess skin.
Right.
And there are doctors that will perform literal facelift types of procedures on them, but they don't get these infections in the folds of their face. But the other thing is that there are dogs that get neutered, and there are people who are putting marbles and that type of thing to take the place of their neutering, actually.
Producer Tom and his fiancée have a little dog named Freddie, and he's a cute little guy. He's even cuter when his hair grows out. But I could never imagine them taking Freddie to a plastic surgeon, maybe to make his legs longer or something.
Yeah, and the pet plastic surgery is very interesting. That's more of an underground type of thing. Other than, like I said, there are implants that they're putting in, with neutered dogs and removing extra skin from the face. But very unusual to have an actual, just a cosmetic procedure. Oh, I don't like how my cat looks. Let's give my cat a facelift.
Man.
That's a little more extreme that we're not really.
Has anybody ever attempted to have plastic surgery done to their own kid like that? Because maybe they just didn't like the way they looked?
Oh, that's very common. I had one parent call me, and her child was literally 7 years old. And
all right, and I'm not talking about a deformity that you're trying to fix. Okay.
No. This was actually an Asian parent said, my son wants to look Caucasian. Can you operate on his eyelids and give him an extra fold on his eyelid to make him look Caucasian? And I thought, he's how old? 7 years old?
Oh, my
God.
He's
7. You do see that. It's not that common. There is a medical term called Munchausen by proxy, where parents will bring their kids in to have medical procedures done on them as a way for the parents to get attention.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a real medical issue, and we do see that in people who are trying to bring their kids in to have plastic surgery done.
Let's take a few calls, and we'll talk more. Michael in Cleveland, Ohio, welcome to the show. Hi, Michael.
Question for your guest, a hard one.
Sure.
What's a common mistake most people have done on themselves by plastic surgeons?
Wait, one more time.
What's the most common mistake a person can make on themselves by a plastic surgeon?
Okay, what is the biggest mistake you can make there, Tony, that they can do on themselves?
The biggest mistake is that there are a lot of doctors out there who are performing plastic surgery that are not properly trained for it. In my community, there are emergency room doctors, there are ophthalmologists who are doing tummy tucks on patients, who are doing liposuction, and they have no real formal training for it. So the number one thing, if you're looking to have plastic surgery done so you don't become a victim of botched plastic surgery or any of these kind of crazy stories, is make sure your surgeon is certified by the American Board of Plastic Surgery. If your surgeon is not certified by the American Board of Plastic Surgery, there's a possibility that doctor has not had the proper training. We have seen some crazy things. My old mentor in L.A., he did a nose job on a patient once, and the patient said, I had an implant put in. He made an incision into the patient's nose, pulled out the handle of a toothbrush that a doctor had put into his nose to make his nose look longer.
Unbelievable. What about wings on people?
I'm sorry?
Wings on people.
This is an interesting story. There is, and I actually posted on my blog, Celeb Cosmetic Surgery, about this a couple of years ago, that there's a doctor that has been working on trying to create wings for people. This is a real doctor out of Dartmouth that has been working on it. It's nowhere near fruition, but it's crazy how many people have commented on the blog post. It really is something that at this point is very theoretical, but there is a couple of doctors out there who are trying to find a way to literally implant wings onto people.
We have a first-time caller, and Tommy tells me that he has had his tongue split anonymously. Hey, there you go. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm an engineer, actually, for a large telecommunication company for the past 10 years.
Okay.
I've had my tongue split. I actually went to a studio I used to work at personally, and I know our medical grade was above and beyond your normal, going to see your doctor. We had strict things, and we once a year would have to go get certified. We're all certified with bloodborne pathogen and CPR. And we actually do have people on staff that are anesthesiologists as well. So we can provide that, but most people choose to use like the cutting and stuff as a rite of passage because United States citizens, as young kids, I've noticed, don't have anything here in the States.
Well, let me ask you, why did you have your tongue split?
I had it done mainly just, it was like I've been working for years, and I'm like, okay, I wanted to feel comfortable in my own skin.
Does it look like a snake's tongue?
Yeah,
you know how it's split?
I can actually move both sides perfectly fine. I was cut over a half inch, and it's healed in the past years like 1/4.
Does it grow back together?
Yeah, eventually. It slowly grows back together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What about infections, Tony?
Well, that's a big concern, and the gentleman that called kind of addressed a little of that, but that's our big concern whenever you do any type of any type of surgical procedure, is that if you're not having it done in a medical setting where the instruments are sterilized and the sutures are sterilized, then that's a huge problem. Now these people who are doing the procedure, typically, if you get an infection, they can't prescribe an antibiotic for you because they're not a doctor. And your next option is to go to the emergency room. And if you don't have insurance, now you're talking about over $1,000 just for an emergency room visit.
I was, talking about the story right before you came on, Tony, that one of the fastest growing procedures, chin implants. What do they put in the chin? What's the implant?
Chin implants are actually made of solid silicone. Now, silicone is one of the only substances that is considered inert in the body. So we can implant silicone like breast implants, and the body typically does not react to it. So last year there was a 72% increase in the amount of chin implants that were placed. And interestingly enough, half of the people who have chin implants are men. And we're seeing that a lot nowadays, and we do believe that part of that phenomenon may be due to, believe it or not, FaceTime. People talking on their cell phones and using videos. And I don't know if you've looked at it. I have an iPhone, and I've FaceTimed with some of my family members, and I look terrible on my phone, and it's the angle that you look into your phone when you do these video chats. A lot of people are noticing different parts of their face that they may not have noticed before, and they go, oh, look, my chin doesn't look very good. And people are actually having procedures done now because they see these perceived defects on FaceTime and other types of, like, Skype and that type of thing.
So they get these squared-off chins like Dudley Do-Right.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times it's due to the angle that the phone is at. I know when I look at it, I look like I've got a double chin all the time whenever I look into my phone because of the angle that it's
at. Have you ever had plastic surgery?
Yeah, and I had a major plastic surgery where my jaw used to be twice the size it is now, and I wrote about that in my book In Stitches of how I had this painful operation between high school and college to have my jaw broken, reset,
Ouch.
And I had my jaw wired shut for 6 weeks afterwards. And it changed my life, and it started me on the path of becoming a plastic surgeon, so I wrote a lot about that.
That is amazing.
But it was really painful. I mean, we're talking Guantanamo Bay type pain, and this was not a fun surgery.
Let's go to Nancy east of the Rockies in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure. Go ahead.
I had a breast reduction surgery, and I don't know if the doctor that did it knew what he was doing, but he was a certified plastic surgeon. And on my left breast, I had to have 3 surgeries.
Oh, my gosh.
And he, it's deformed now to a point. But my main thing was the doctor claimed that when I was a younger lady, I smoked, and then I quit. And he claimed because I smoked in my lifetime caused me to have these problems with my surgery.
Does this make sense, Tony?
If you did not smoke, within a couple of months of your surgery, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because studies do show that smoking basically acts as a tourniquet, and it can cause areas that have had surgery to heal improperly, to get infected and that type of thing. But the effects of smoking wear off relatively quickly, usually within the span of a few weeks. to the point where a few weeks later, your blood supply and the constriction of the blood vessels that carbon monoxide and nicotine in the cigarettes cause, usually that's worn off by then.
You just mentioned the little toothbrush in somebody's nose. What other bizarre things have people done that you can mention on the radio?
There's an interesting thing, a lot of people are trying to lose weight nowadays, and there is a doctor out in California that's been recently reported that he takes a mesh and he will stitch a mesh patch on top of your tongue so that when you eat food, it makes it very, very uncomfortable. And it causes people to actually have a liquid diet and to lose weight. So this is one of the newest weight loss techniques where while you're awake, you get this mesh patch stitched onto the top of your tongue so that every time you eat, it makes it very uncomfortable.
Bizarre.
Costs about $1,500, and it's a weight loss procedure. Now, there's one doctor in the United States doing it. He charges a lot of money for it. Very strange. Another kind of interesting surgery, and this is a very real surgery, is that there are people who are having, typically men, who are having the fat on their abdomen liposuctioned to make the fat look like a six-pack. So we know what a six-pack is. A six-pack
is that rolly look, right?
It's basically muscles.
Yeah.
But there are doctors who will actually liposuction the fat, mold the fat to look like a six-pack. So you get people who could have literally, they have pot bellies, but they have six-packs.
Jeez, why don't we just buy those plastic Halloween things and wear them, right?
Oh, that'd be a lot easier way to do it. And you got to wonder, how's it going to look like, 10 years from now? That six-pack's going to turn into a party ball or a 12-pack by then.
That is bizarre. They're all bizarre. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much, George.
Sure, Kevin.
Doctor, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
One thing that I've seen recently that's been blowing my mind, I'm a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, and actually one of my men had it done, was they had the silicone implants along his eyebrows, which made it look like a reptilian ridgeline, and which was really strange. And we actually called him Raptor when we were in Afghanistan. And and my other question is, are there really muscle or bodybuilders putting like butt implants and calf implants to accentuate like muscle texture? And did you hear on WIOD, I guess it was just like a couple of weeks ago, I heard of some lady, I'm not sure if it was in Miami or in the area, that she got busted for doing butt implants.
That's right.
To fix a flat.
Yeah, that's exactly true. I guess they're getting butt implants too, Tony, aren't they?
Yeah, so male implants are something it's not real common, but that does happen. They're solid implants. So these are different than female, like breast implants that are soft, but they're solid implants that are placed behind the calf muscle to make the calves look bigger. There are a lot of guys, you may see it, who are lifting weights. They got big arms and big chests and these skinny little legs, and so they're getting calf implants. There are chest implants or pectoral implants for men, bicep implants. There was a story of a doctor out in Miami, however, who was this renegade doctor who was putting female breast implants in men. And so obviously being careful with something like that because you just never know. But it is not as common as people may think, but it definitely, those procedures do happen. Typically about 1,000 or so a year is what the statistics are showing.
Tony, these are some of the strangest stories I've ever heard.
Well, we're using leeches as well. That's something that I wrote about in my book, and that's something very, very common. I mean, leeches and maggots are the other thing that we see very commonly. Hospitals, believe it or not, have leeches in the pharmacy. Most big hospitals have them because that's what plastic surgeons will go to if all else fails.
Well, and they work. Tony, thank you so much. Tony's book, In Stitches, Bizarre and Botched Plastic Surgeries. Up next, we're going to Bigfoot country. Get ready for this coast-to-coast ride. Where are these creatures? We'll find out. Tonight, it's Creature Night now on Coast to Coast AM. For a couple hours, we're going to be talking about Bigfoot. As a matter of fact, we're going to the heart of Bigfoot country in Willow Creek, California. That's where the name Bigfoot became a household word back in 1958. Then at the end of the show, we talk about the beast of Boggy Creek. Get ready. That's all next on Coast to Coast AM. And let me tell you a little bit about Stephen Streufert, proprietor of a bookshop in Willow Creek, California. Now, that is the heart of the historic Bigfoot country, Willow Creek, It's the same area where the Bigfoot name became a household word in 1958 after giant tracks were found in a cast just north of town up in Bluff Creek. It's the same area where the famous 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film of Bigfoot was filmed. Stephen blogs. You can find that link at coasttocoastam.com. Here he is tonight on Coast to Coast AM. Stephen, welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How's it feel to live out there in Bigfoot capital?
Well, it's a never-ending story. You know, every day there's some new Bigfoot story and someone calling me, someone coming in here on their pilgrimage to the Mecca or Jerusalem of Bigfooting.
Has anybody ever been hurt out there because of Bigfoot?
There are stories like that, people going missing. There was one that was a well-known hoax, but nothing too documented that I would call to mind immediately. People go missing all the time. We find skeletons on creek beds here, but that's most likely due to the other thing we're famous for out here in Humboldt County, the marijuana growing industry. The big
yes, it is. I wonder if Bigfoot's out there for that, huh?
Well, there's a lot of growers out here. It's considered a legal thing for the so-called medicinal purposes.
Medicinal, yeah.
Yeah, but I've asked the growers, and most of them don't have a story to tell you. You would think that if Bigfoot is the wise creature of the woods, he might be using these herbs for himself, but I've never heard a story, and that may be because they just want to keep their spot secret.
How big is Willow Creek, Stephen?
Well, it's a tiny little hamlet, really. We have about 4 blocks downtown, and then about a mile and a half east of town, there's a couple of little outposts like my bookstore, Bigfoot Books, and the place where they serve the Bigfoot burger, right next to me. And down there in that town, you can see on my YouTube page, which is linked up on my blog if you go there, you'll see my little walking tour I did from the 4 blocks or so of downtown, where you can see Bigfoot history and Bigfoot iconography on every street corner, and almost every other shop has something, a Bigfoot statue, or we have the Bigfoot Museum here, which is quite well regarded.
It's like Roswell in the UFO case.
Oh, yeah.
Same kind of thing. How did you get interested in the Bigfoot story?
Well, I'm the usual kid from the 70s, growing up, came out to California, and the first thing I knew I was seeing the Patterson film in the drive-in on the big screen.
Sure.
Back when they still had drive-ins. And, I was reading all the paranormal books out of the library, pretty much read everything on Bigfoot that I could find in there when I was, 10 years old. But it took quite a while before I got back interested in it. I was living up here in Willow Creek in the early 90s, Humboldt County, going to school, and just came out here to Willow Creek basically because we were going to have a kid, and this is a place where it's funny and natural, and down there on the coast in the Redwood Zone, it's foggy and dreary quite a lot of the time. So I moved up here for other reasons than Bigfoot, but, that was in 2001. I've been here, over 10 years now.
Now, in the 10 years you've been there, Stephen, have you seen anything?
Yeah, well, before I came up here, I thought Bigfoot was just kind of a humorous thing. We had a little church of Bigfoot called the Church of Bigfoot Scientists, and my friends and I would have campfires and joke around about it. But one time we were hiking back up in the hill in the Redwoods, and we got to the top of the hill there, and the dogs started acting funny, and when your dogs are, mountain dogs, and then, what they bark at has a very distinct quality to it. If they see a bear, well, these things were barking in a way that I'd never heard them bark before. We then heard a crack in the brush and looked down the hill in this thick second-growth forest, and all I saw was a brown thing moving in the brush, and then it disappeared. I saw a head, which seemed rather tall. That was about it. And had other things happen since then, but I can't say that they were definitively Bigfoot encounters.
But it made you a believer?
Is up in the hill.
You became a believer after that?
I'm sorry, what?
You became a believer after that?
Well, the kind of person I am, I don't like to talk about belief. For me, it's something that I'm investigating. It's become an increasingly curious thing as I sit here in this store, and I'm constantly exposed to witness stories. Everyday people who come in here and tell me, well, I saw one of those things, and when you can look them in the eye and see that they're ordinary, normal people, you see that they're not pulling your leg.
No, of course, yeah. Now, your bookstore, is it got just Bigfoot books in there, or just about everything?
Oh, no. Before this, I was in the world of antiquarian books, and it's sort of what drew me as a career path. But I do specialize in Bigfoot books. There's about 100 titles in here, and that's the best of them. There's hundreds of books out there, but there are many of them that are very small, private press type of publications. They're hard to find. Many very rare books in Bigfoot.
Stephen, the Bigfoot community is pretty different. The older guys who were researchers years ago, many of them are fading out of this. Some of the younger guys who are in, it seems to be a very egotistical pushed endeavor now. Loaded with some, people who are, fraudulent. We've had these stories. You've heard of them, of course. And, you've got a lot of that. You've got a lot of competition. It doesn't seem to be teamwork out there. That's my perception. Am I right or wrong?
Well, it depends whom you're hanging with, my friends, they're a good bunch of people. They've all since become independent researchers. I guess it used to be they were all in the BFRO.
Right.
But, this goes back to the first generation, the Bigfoot Wars theme, all those guys known as the Four Horsemen of Sasquatchery or Bigfootery, guys like Grover Krantz and John Green and Rene the Hinden. Those fellows all squabbled with each other, and they split off on various points of disagreement. And that's continued to this day.
Sure.
But even more now, it's a quest for glory and a quest for fame. We get seemingly closer and closer to this thing every day, and yet it seems farther and farther away. But, with the DNA project that's been going on now, we all sort of hope for the best. But, everyone wants to keep their secrets, and it's very competitive. And, it's split down the middle between the people who believe in the paranormal Bigfoot stuff, and they approach it almost in a spiritual way, and the hardcore physical scientists who want to see this as an animal. And on and on and on it goes. Ape or human, and the arguments never end. And there's a new controversy seemingly every day when you get involved in this thing.
Give us an update, Stephen, on this Bigfoot DNA project.
Yeah, well, I suspect I'm one of the few people who's not under some kind of non-disclosure agreement.
Or a gag order or something like that.
But at the same time, I don't want to go revealing all the rumors. I mean, they're out there. There's just an endless supply of rumors. When this paper is going to be released and what the DNA is telling us. Some of these leaks, they seem rather convincing. If you Google up the Robert Lindsay blog, for instance, you'll get a lot of that. Bigfoot apparently has a fully human mitochondrial DNA, but a non-human nuclear DNA. And we just heard, that a few days ago we just heard this was going to be released in 2 weeks, and then on the DNA technician's website, Melba Ketchum is her name, out of Texas.
She's doing it?
She's the head of the lab. She's a veterinary doctor, but she now has a full scientific team working on this. They've submitted a formal scientific paper to a proper academic-level peer-reviewed journal, and now apparently it's past peer review. So
whatever it is.
Whatever it is, whether it will prove that Bigfoot is existing. We've had decades of earlier DNA studies which have said things like it's an unknown primate.
Right. Well, Stephen, where was the sample found, and what was the sample?
Well, there are various rumors about that too, but there are some well-known samples. There are anywhere between 100 and 200 samples, depending on whom you're listening to. But one quite notable one supposedly came from a couple of Sasquatch that were shot here in central Sierra Nevada back in the end of 2010.
Well, is she doing DNA on a lot of different samples then, or of just one creature, samples from one creature?
No, this is actually a rare case of collaboration among Sasquatch, Bigfoot people.
Okay. So what, everybody brought their samples in at the same time and just said, DNA all this stuff?
Yeah. Well, it's been going on for a couple of years. You had Melba Ketchum and David Politis on your show a few years back, and that was the announcement that drew in a lot of these samples.
This is the same thing? You mean they still...
Yes, it's still going on. The agony of it never ceases, but,
wow.
Yes, they got samples from all across the country.
I thought that came and went and faded away, so that they really haven't even announced anything yet.
Not formally. They're responsible for a lot of leaks, and a lot of people involved in this are leaking information. And a lot of people are angry, and there's lawsuit threats flying around.
Okay. So, but some of these samples, Stephen, could be animal, could be from a bear, could be from, a mountain lion, who knows what, mixed in, I guess, with what may be a Bigfoot sample. Who knows, right?
Sure. Well, they've already gotten to past that point. These samples have a methodology for eliminating known animals. That's rather easy. That's the first primary thing you do is to compare it to various known animals. So what they have now are the ones that they feel confirmed positive for Sasquatch. And I don't know the exact number of these, but there are a good number of them. And there are also other DNA studies now that are starting up. I know of at least 4 groups that are doing their own projects, waiting for this one to come out, and then hopefully to confirm or compare their results.
Well, if it's authenticated, it'll be a huge story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If
it's a big if, because we don't have a body or a sample to compare it to.
No.
But as this one blogger, Robert Lindsay, has pointed out over and over again, and many others, we don't need the body anymore. We don't want to go out killing an animal to prove it exists. But through DNA, we can tell how closely we're related to chimpanzees, which is thought to be about 98% the same DNA.
Well, if this creature, Stephen, exists, and I'm convinced people are seeing something, like you say about people who come into your bookstore, you can tell if they're lying or not. I mean, generally. So people are seeing something. I don't know if it's an ape or who knows what it is, but they're seeing something. But why can't we get one? Why can't we find the remains of one? Where is the thing?
There are a lot of explanations for that, too. And one of them, of course, is the multidimensional alien theory, that they can disappear at will. One case came up pretty recently, this lady out of Oklahoma is saying they can go to that place where they go. And so she insists that they're a flesh and blood animal, but they're also capable of somehow leaving this world into another one. But, I mean, more realistically, there are parsimonious explanations for these things. Like, this must be, if it exists, it's a creature that is very good at hiding from us. And it would have to be smart enough to understand what kind of creature we are to evade us.
Yet some people say, I saw it lumbering across the road. I saw it standing here throwing rocks at my cabin. I mean, so it conflicts with a creature that would hide in a cave or somewhere out in the woods, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, if you go back to the earliest accounts in the 1840s and such, these were described as very rare things, very rare creatures. Like the reports out of BC, Canada, that came from J.W. Burns, who was an Indians agency employee with the Chehalis Indians outside of Vancouver. He had reports of them being very rare, but at one time common, according to the native First Nations people. So apparently, according to the native people around here, too, they were once much more open to people and interacting with them. In fact, there are stories of them even trading with humans, speaking a language that was very similar to Native American languages, even abducting humans, and in some cases mating with humans and producing offspring.
That could be pretty dramatic.
Yeah. I don't know if this is too risque for Coast to Coast, but
well,
that's part of the lore.
Yeah.
You know? And so they're described as a very rare thing in those early stories, but as human habitation is spread out increasingly into the rural areas, we may be living in more of the natural parts of the country than they did back in the day when it was purely natural. And there's a big misconception that Bigfoot was something in the Pacific Northwest. We have regional groups all across the country. Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, just everywhere, Arizona, and there are their own creature sightings there too.
Sure.
Like you're going to hear with Boggy Creek.
Well, and I remember when I was a kid, my first exposure to Bigfoot or Sasquatch really was the abominable snowman, the Yeti from the Himalayas. I mean, that's the story that captured me when I was a youngster. And then later on, years later, that's when I began to find out about Bigfoot and Sasquatch here in North America.
Sure. Well, it did start in the 20s. It was mostly just considered one of those odd Indian tales, like their culture must all be purely legendary and superstitious, right? So these things couldn't have been real. But this J.W. Burns, he published articles in the paper there, and this Sasquatch idea, he took it seriously. And that kind of lurked in the background until René de Hinden came over here from Switzerland, and he saw the article about the abominable snowman. That was a very big thing in the 1951 when they found those Yeti tracks that you've seen, I'm sure.
That's right.
The big famous ones. And, so this was the background. In the 50s, there was the abominable snowman craze. And René de Hinden said, wouldn't that be something to go find one of those? And the fellow he was talking to said, well, we have those right here. And he was up there in Canada, So it wasn't too long before René de Hinden caught the bug, and that spread to John Green, one of the other early fellows, ran the paper there.
All right, well, hold on for a second, Stephen. We're going to take this quick break. We're going to come back in just a moment. We'll continue talking with you about Bigfoot and some related cases right here on Coast to Coast AM. Well, next hour, we'll take your phone calls on Bigfoot and questions also for Stephen Stroyfort as we talk about, of course, Bigfoot country, Willow Creek, California. And then the final hour, we're talking about the beast of Boggy Creek, a separate interview with a very special person. So stand by for that as well. We'll be back. And we're with Stephen Stroyfort. Stephen, wasn't it Raymond Wallace that apparently was the one who was part of those tracks that were found in 58, and that when he died, his son said that he had found large wooden feet, that he might have faked the whole thing? What's your take on all of that?
Yeah. Well, my involvement with this gets kind of personal because my next-door neighbor used to work with Wallace and his brother.
Really? Okay.
Shorty Wallace. And in fact, he told me the other day that...
He was a logger, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was a contractor working for logging, building roads.
Mm-hmm.
This is a frustrating story because there's so many people that came out and said, well, Bigfoot is dead. This proves that it's false. But there were footprints found before Ray Wallace was even here. And, there's a record of this going back centuries, thousands of years with the native people. But, we had footprints found in the 40s. And we had a researcher up there, and after the war, he was perhaps seeking some solitude. He would go up in the Bluff Creek area, and he actually interacted with them. He would leave out piles of food, and they would exchange gifts and so forth. But, by the time the 50s came along, they found those footprints when they were cutting a new road up into the forest. This was virgin timber, all old-growth Douglas fir forest back in there with some cedars and really beautiful country. Still beautiful today, but of course a lot of it's been logged off. And this road, seems to have stirred up the Sasquatches, because the reports started coming out of this thing they were calling Bigfoot, 2 words, Bigfoot. And they were cutting in this road, and they would find, their tents or their trucks were surrounded by these giant footprints when they come back in the morning to work. And Jerry Crew, who lived here locally, just east of here, working up there, he was the cat skinner. He would drive the Caterpillar tractor up, cutting, the new road, and he would come back to his tractor in the morning and find it surrounded by these footprints. So he told the story, and it kind of got out. Some articles were published locally, but what really struck was when he contacted his friend Bob Titmus out of Anderson, which is near Reading, just up over by I-5, and he came out here and they made plaster casts. So you've probably seen the photograph that was published on the front page of the Humboldt Times in October of him holding this giant footprint. Now, if you compare that to the Ray Wallace tracks, it's not at all the same footprint.
That's right.
Those footprints were found all over the place. So among the Bigfoot community, it's likely you're going to find people saying, well, they're all real, and Ray Wallace just copied that from the real-life footprint. But, his footprint stompers that the family showed on the news, they did look very suspiciously like a lot of the famous tracks that were found later in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
Or in 63 there was some found. But it's pretty well known that some of the tracks were hoaxed. It's just really hard to tell. The early investigators, John Green and Renee Hinden, they followed these tracks coming down off the mountain, walking along the dusty New Cut Road, and then going back down in the creek. How did they hoax that? It would have been quite difficult wearing these wooden shoes. But Ray Wallace, gets connected with the Patterson film, and a lot of people wasn't there a deathbed confession, and there wasn't. Roger Patterson never confessed on his deathbed. He died an early death of cancer, and he insisted on his deathbed that his film was real. But
well, what I like about that is the fact that film is so old. I mean, nowadays with Photoshop and video editing and everything, who knows what you could do. But in those days, they didn't have that. What you saw is what you got. And, a lot of experts have looked at this, and they scratch their heads. They're pretty baffled about it.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
And, that was on film. Much higher resolution quality, and, you can blow it up and analyze it. You can see the actual thing and know that it wasn't manipulated. A guy named Bill Munns down out of the L.A. area has been studying the film. He has some 8 or 9 copies of it in the highest quality, and he's been doing frame-by-frame studies. So if it were spliced or edited in any way, he's a film professional, worked special effects and costuming in Hollywood for years. He would know. And so far, despite what a lot of these other researchers say, the film wasn't spliced, it wasn't edited. There was no Bluff Creek massacre and so forth and so on. Either that's a real creature or it's a very good suit, and it's the real thing. Compared to today's capacity, everyone's always asking, with all the digital cameras and the cell phones out there, why don't people ever get any video?
Mm-hmm.
But, what we get is these really blurry, ridiculous things on YouTube, and quite a number of them are just humans or stumps or shadows. But, by the time you get your camera out and you push the buttons and get your little app running, and the thing runs through its autofocus cycle, that creature that you might have seen is going to be long gone.
Well, and I guess people have set up cameras that will turn on, turn off, timer cameras and things like that they've put out in the wild. I saw one where they had a deer run by, something like that. Maybe it's just a matter of time, Stephen.
Maybe, yeah. The theory out there now is that Bigfoot can sense these things. They can sense the electronic noise or the vibration coming out of them, that they somehow know. They can see in the infrared spectrum better than we can, perhaps. So those little sensor lights trigger them. And, once again, we're talking about a creature that is supposedly very clever and knows everything in its environment. So it's very hard to fool them, supposedly. So they say.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Native Americans and some of the things they said, some of the things they found. What have you uncovered, Stephen?
Well, Willow Creek is this very strange place out here, not just in the native culture, but in the, European, I guess you would call them, culture. There's stories of all sorts of strange things. In the giant salamanders, the river serpents, the mer creatures that live in the river, little people. These are very common things in the native culture, and they do still seem to believe in these things. A lot of them do. Up in here, it's a really mixed bag what exactly Bigfoot is. Some of them will say Bigfoot is human, like you might have seen in the David Paulides presentation. But, just as many say they're just another creature out there. And on top of that, there's the people who believe they're shapeshifters or that they have some kind of spiritual ability. They're mystical creatures. They come from the spirit world, So, just like ordinary people, and Native Americans are all going to believe the same thing.
What is your take of the witnesses, the people who report seeing this? Campers, police officers, a dentist in the northwest. These are people who have nothing to gain, everything to lose, yet they keep saying that they see this thing.
Yeah. You can usually tell the witness who wants attention and fame when they start asking you to edit their book for them, But
that's right.
The ordinary people, they'll come in my shop, and they may do so for months before they ever mention Bigfoot, and they don't necessarily tell you their location or their name. They don't want to be published on my blog. It's an ongoing problem trying to get witnesses to come forward with any kind of concrete information. But they'll still tell you that, and they'll look you in the eye, and you can tell that they really do seem to have seen something, including a lot of my friends in the Bigfoot world. They've seen these, and quite often they didn't want to see it. It's something that happened to them, and quite regularly it had a very traumatic effect. It disturbs a person's sense of reality. What is that? That thing is not even supposed to exist. And it's very hard to deny them. These aren't outrageous stories, like, it had fangs and blood dripping and hideous glowing eyes. Usually it's something very prosaic, like they saw it in their backyard and it was eating blackberries, and, you ask them, what did it do next? It stood up, and it walked away on 2 feet into the forest,
And most people report seeing the same thing. It's a big creature. It's hairy. It's got a cone-type head. A lot of similarities there, huh?
Yeah. The image of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or the wild man has been around since the earliest times. We had it in Europe as well, ancient Babylonian times. They had different images of it. And so in the 1800s, you saw a lot of reports of this thing being like a wild human, oftentimes wearing clothes, carrying clubs. We have a report up here, came from a Yurok native woman, from the last century, and she described the Oma, who, lived in caves, and they would rob graves, and they would amass wealth, and they had medicine pouches around their necks, and they were basically human, And then there's the other camp that sees them as sort of an ape. The cone head and the brown furry, that image has sort of solidified and grown, especially with our knowledge of gorillas, and chimps. These people back in the early days may not have had a real concrete idea of what an ape was.
Well, give me some percents of speculation on your part, if you would. One, what's the percent, do you think, of probability that whatever these people are seeing, they're seeing something? I'd say that's almost 100%. What about you?
Well, there are notorious problems with human perception. We are capable of seeing things that don't exist, or things that exist in some inner realm, or maybe spiritual type things. But when someone tells you they stood right in front of it and looked it in the face, that's very hard to deny.
That's right.
When you're driving your car at night, quite a large percentage of the sightings actually occur along roadsides. I hear those all the time out here. It's very easy for your mind to see something in the shadows, and it's really hard. I'm much more skeptical of human reports and human belief systems than I am of the Bigfoot. But I still think that a real solid witness who got a good look at the thing, that's the best evidence we have, and all the footprints in the world aren't going to compete with that.
No, not at all. Okay, so you would say that whatever they're seeing something generally, so that's a high percent, I take it, right?
Well, there are grades. BFRO has a class system, A, B, C, how to rate sightings. Quite often the Bigfoot researchers are taking almost everything as Bigfoot. An acorn falls out of a tree, and that's suddenly a rock being thrown by Bigfoot. And on YouTube, and it's just gotten out of control with the what we call the blob squatch. It's a blurry form, a shadowy form. You can stare at something like the patterns of wood in your paneling on your walls or out of the ceiling, and you can see faces and shapes. And quite often that's what I think people are seeing. And it's really, really hard to ascertain at what point we can say this was a real valid sighting. And it's one of the challenges of taking these reports. And, when you talk to witnesses, you don't want to insult them. You don't want to ridicule them or say it's just all in your head. So you have to be very sensitive in how you handle it.
Well, that's true. Now tell me about your Facebook discussion group.
Okay, well, there's a link for it up on my blog that you can go see. But it's facebook.com. Where did it go here?
And why did you see?
Facebook.com/groups/SmartBigfoot. All one word, Smart Bigfoot. And it's called the Coalition for Reason, Science, Satire, and Sanity in Bigfoot Research.
Why'd you set that up?
It sort of became a necessity with these blob squatches, and one of the other things that people keep reporting is these stick structures. Every tree or branch that falls in a pattern, they start saying that Sasquatch did this. And with the rise of Facebook, suddenly the Bigfoot community got absolutely interconnected. And all these people, it used to take years to kind of break into this scene and to meet these people, and it was really quite an honor. All of a sudden, you were exposed to hundreds of them, and they're coming out of the woodwork now even more with this Finding Bigfoot show. And everyone wants that experience. Once you found your footprint, it might have been made by a bear, or once you find your stick structure, it might have just been trees that fall down like they do in my backyard every day. Little branches and things fall in patterns. But, so we decided to form this group just to try to have some real rational, critical thinking, where we're not afraid to say skepticism. Skepticism is like a dirty word in the Bigfoot world. Like, it almost means mocker or disbeliever.
I think it's healthy, if you have an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you just don't say no to everything without investigating, getting some facts and things like that.
Sure enough. I've listened to the Coast to Coast from, I guess, 1989 or 1990. And,
mm-hmm.
I mean, absolutely fascinating radio show. Long-time listener. But, I have to take a step back and say, well, not everything on this show could possibly all be true,
Right.
And so I'm really fascinated by these things. The world is a weird place, and one of the best ways to find out how weird it is to study science. The methods of science are showing us the world that we can't see with our eyes. In primitive times we saw with our eyes, and we came up with meaningful descriptions of the world. But now we are actually aware that there are galaxies, and we know about things like quantum physics and so forth and so on. So, I think that to truly understand science and not take it in a sort of new age way, like because quantum physics says this, then suddenly all the strange ideas in the world that you can come up with are also true. I mean, we want to be able to test these things and make them real. This is how we get magnificent devices like smartphones.
Well, it could be this creature, Stephen, could be a giant ape. It could be some kind of monkey. Who knows what it could be? It could be pure animal as opposed to. When I was a kid again, I always used to think it was the missing link. They talked about the link between ape and man. I always thought maybe Bigfoot might have been that little crossover. I find it difficult to accept the dimensional theory. How about you?
Well, I like to say, you could say humans are spiritual creatures, and, you can meditate or whatever you do and go into another universe, as it were, in your experience. But when you're trying to document something and understand it, it's best to look at real evidence, and to try to put these things together logically in a way that can make sense and be useful, to have useful knowledge, instead of, all these ideas of the monsters. Bigfoot is a monster. Well, the gorilla was seen as a vicious monster, too, until we had habituators get out there, and people like Diane Fossey actually lived among them and were able to document their real lifestyle. So this is what we all kind of hope we can achieve with Bigfoot. If it's really out there, we should. And, there are people who claim to have Bigfoot coming in their backyard, and they claim things like Bigfoot is human and that Bigfoot speaks to them in their heads. There's one fellow who has a teacher with a capital T, Bigfoot.
I love it. Stay with Stephen. Much more to talk with you about. Plus, we've got an hour of phone calls, and we will open up those lines right now on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, this will be your hour now. We're going to take your phone calls as we talk about Bigfoot on Coast to Coast AM. We're with Stephen Streufert. Stephen, we were talking about Bigfoot as possibly being dimensional. You're not in that camp.
Well, whatever spiritual realities may exist, I think that we are flesh and blood creatures here. Biologically, we understand now that humans are apes. We are very closely related to the chimps, and sometimes we are even called the third chimpanzee. So these arguments about dimensional realities, I think there's something internal.
Mm-hmm.
You can experience these things. You can meditate and go into a timeless, spaceless state of mind. But when the day is done, you have to come back and live in your body. And whatever this Bigfoot creature might be, it is definitely a primate. It's an ape along with us. And the question really is it part of the Homo lineage, along with the hominins like us and our ancestors, or is it a parallel evolution?
That's right.
From an ape, perhaps splitting off before we split with a common ancestor that we share with the chimpanzees. So I think it's interesting to consider these things, you know. But I mean, ultimately, you can get lost in that. You can start believing things that you think without evidence, and before you know it, you've constructed a whole system of reality. I know this all too well, running a bookstore, that there's just endless supply of reality systems. And we really need critical thinking to try to get to the bottom of what's really real.
It seems docile. Is that a pretty good assumption?
Well, yeah. I mean, just like I was saying about the gorilla, it's a creature that apparently is capable of great rage, has great strength. It's reported to demonstrate that with bluff charges and howls and roars and smashing of sticks.
On Facebook, globally, only 44% of all parents said they spy on their teens' Facebook accounts. Details emerging of a plan by billionaire entrepreneurs to mine asteroids for their resources. The multi-million-dollar plan would use robotic spacecraft to squeeze chemical components of fuel and minerals such as platinum and gold out of rocks. The founders include film director and explorer James Cameron, who's been on the program, as well as Google's chief executive Larry Page and its executive chairman Eric Schmidt. They even aim to create a fuel depot in space by 2020. Head of the EnterpriseMission.com and our science advisor, Richard C. Hoagland here. Is this going to work, Richard?
You know, George, this is like an early birthday present.
For you?
Yep. About a century ago, during the Civil War, remember, Abraham Lincoln initiated the Transcontinental Railway. And it has been said that before the railway, the United States was impossible, and after the railway, the United States was inevitable.
That's right.
What these guys did this morning was to kick off what I will call the second age of space. This is like Kennedy all over again, except this time we're going to stay, because the bottom line of what motivates a lot of human beings is, how do you make money? How do you make a living? And up until now, except for communication satellites and some very expensive tourist junkets, you haven't been able to make a living in space. This technology curve, this plan, this projection that they laid out at that 2-hour press conference was fascinating, because it's all doable, it's all with current technology, it's all with very smart and very, very rich people, and the game plan they're laying out for us is going to be transparent, because the technology, they emphasized this morning, is going to be made available to all the rest of us. Can you imagine what Enterprise and I could do with a couple of these satellites to go and look for artifacts in the solar system?
Amazing. But how do they know they can find like platinum and gold on an asteroid?
Because you use spectral analysis, remote sensing. We've been doing it for 100 years with telescopes. What they're planning to do is actually send a fleet of little spacecraft, just like my departed friend Kraft Ericke recommended 30, 40 years ago. I mean, this is such an echo of Kraft Ericke's brilliant idea for inheriting the riches of the solar system. We need, George, to do a whole program on this with probably people like Jerry Pournelle, because this is the beginning of the civilian democratization.
Was never presented for slaughter, and milk does not transmit BSE, in case you're worried about that. Well, no one can accuse the heart attack grill of false advertising. A woman collapsed into unconsciousness at the Las Vegas restaurant while eating a double bypass burger, drinking a margarita, smoking a cigarette. The customer was the second in just over 2 months to collapse at the restaurant while eating one of the famed burgers, named after various forms of cardiac arrest. Back in February, another customer was caught on video being carted out by paramedics after suffering a heart attack while eating a quadruple bypass burger. Home prices dropping again in February in the most major cities for a 6th straight month, a sign that the modest gains haven't been enough to boost sales. The steepest declines in Atlanta, Chicago, Cleveland, prices rising in Phoenix, San Diego, and Miami, unchanged in Dallas. Registered investment advisor Mish Shedlock with us here. Still not out of the woods yet with the housing market, Mish.
No, not out of the woods at all, George, but housing is one of the few things that I'm actually starting to get a little bit bullish on. Home prices are now back to 2002 levels, and that's in nominal terms. If we adjust for inflation, say the price of food, the price of gas, we're now back to 1998 levels. Maybe some places have some room to fall. There's some places that probably already have bottomed. However, the caveat, there's always one, though, right, George, is to take advantage of this, you need to have a job, which is, not easy to get now, and you need to not already have a house.
That's right.
So those are the two things. But even once home prices bottom, I want to caution people, there's still, right now, 2 million homes in foreclosure. Those are going to come on the market. There's another 1.5 million, actually 1.6 million homes that are 90 days delinquent or more. So there's upside pressures that are going to cap these home prices, but we're in the bottoming stage right now. That's a good thing, George.
All right, Mish, thank you so much. To spy or not to spy on your teen on Facebook, that's a question for many parents, and most seem to be okay with it. According to a new survey, 60% of the parents in the United States of teenagers seem okay looking into their kids' social accounts without their knowledge. And moms are most likely to be the ones doing the spying. The information comes from a security software company which surveyed 4,400 parents with children ages 14 to 17 in 11 countries. American parents aren't alone in the snooping, but they seem to be more aggressive about. We're talking about that next on Coast to Coast AM. You will shake your head when you hear about some of these plastic surgery stories. Dr. Tony Yoon is a board-certified plastic surgeon. Tony made his national television debut on Dr. 90210 and has been a frequent guest on The Rachel Ray Show. Tony is now a regular columnist on CNN. He has written articles, his book, In Stitches. He was on with me about a year ago. Here he is back on Coast to Coast. Tony, how are you?
Great, George. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. It is amazing how many botched surgeries, whether it's plastic surgery or just conventional surgery, that are happening all over the place. People who go in to have a leg removed and they take the wrong one or the wrong kidney. How do these things happen, Tony?
Well, it's because doctors and nurses are all human, so there are definitely mistakes that are made, and there's been numerous news reports about the amount of medical mistakes that are made in the hospitals, and hospitals are actually trying to clamp down on it. I know the hospital I work at, if we operate on a body part, they make us actually write the patient's name or our name on that body part so that we know we're taking the right side off. The correct side off, I suppose, is a better way to say it.
And we're going to be talking about some plastic surgeries and mention a few names or so, and I want everyone to know they are not Tony's patients. He may have heard stories about them, but there's that doctor-patient confidentiality. Tell me about Cher's rib removal. Did that happen?
Well, there's all these urban legends in plastic surgery, and so one of them was that there's this urban legend that Cher had ribs removed to make her waist thinner, and it's something that has been a story that has been going on for years and years. Now, Cher has denied it, but it is actually a real procedure. It's very, very unusual. It's nothing that most plastic surgeons have ever seen or done, but there are some people typically who undergo gender reassignment. They change their gender, and it is kind of this crazy surgery that some people undergo.
Is it dangerous?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because your ribs are right on top of your lungs, and one false move when you're removing a rib, and you can puncture a person's lung. And that's why this isn't a typical surgery that plastic surgeons do.
I thought that Adam and Eve only did the rib thing.
You're right on that one, but it is something that is more commonly done outside the United States because it's definitely on the fringe. Most plastic surgeons in the U.S. would cringe thinking about doing that type of procedure.
We are who we are. Our genetics from our parents. My dad was about 5'8", and I'm 5'11". On my mother's side, they were taller, so I got that height from them. But a lot of people are doing strange things. From the City of Angels off the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Next hour, it's one of those classic Coast to Coast shows as we're going to the Bigfoot capital of the world, Willow Creek, California, to talk about Bigfoot. And later, the beast of Boggy Creek. That'll be a few hours after. Get ready. Here's what's happening. Mitt Romney sweeping all 5 Republican primary elections tonight, putting an end once and for all to any hopes for a comeback by his GOP primary opponents. He is setting the stage for a November runoff with President Barack Obama. Stand by for more. A BP engineer intentionally deleted more than 300 text messages that said the company's efforts to control the Gulf of Mexico oil spill were failing, and that the amount of oil leaking was far more than what the company was reporting. In the first criminal charges related to the deadly explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig, which happened in April of 2010, the Justice Department has arrested Kurt Mix, charging him with 2 counts of obstruction of justice for destroying evidence sought by federal authorities. Captain Kelly Sweeney with us, and of course you know Kelly has monitored this case all through its history. Kelly, did you expect something like this?
Ahoy, George. It's great being back with you and all the Coast listeners, and yes, I did, but we should remember one thing. This guy did not cause the disaster.
No.
He's being charged for actions which occurred weeks after the explosion. But the charge indicates, as you pointed out, that BP knew that their efforts for controlling the spill were not working and that more was spilling into the Gulf than they admitted to the government. Now, if it turns out that this guy is convicted and BP was found to have purposely withheld that information, then charges will go all the way up to the highest echelons of the company executives, George.
And they should, Kelly.
They darn well should. And in addition, under international maritime law, employees of Transocean, which owned the rig itself, can be charged with the deaths of those 11 men.
All right, very good. Thank you, Kelly. All right, get ready for this one. The United States Department of Agriculture has confirmed the nation's 4th case of mad cow disease, found in a dairy cow in California. The animal has been euthanized. The carcass is being held under state authority at a rendering facility here in California. Will be destroyed, of course. Though eating contaminated meat or other animal products from cattle with BSE thought to be the cause of a fatal brain disease in humans, the cow...
What's out there, and you know what they're going to ultimately find, right?
Oh, everything. Richard, that's a great story. We'll do that. And also, by the way, happy birthday for tomorrow, my friend. Richard C. Hoagland, EnterpriseMission.com. Now, you may have heard a new voice on Coast to Coast over the last several weeks. Let me tell you a little bit about Dick Urvasti. This guy has been drumming for rock bands at the age of 13, and he's now the newest member of the Coast to Coast AM family. I want you to hear Dick, hear his story. He's with us, and he's going to be with us for a long, long time. Dick, we're so happy to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, doing pretty well tonight, George. How's it going out in California?
Good. And you're up in one of my old staunching grounds of Minneapolis. I lived there back in 78.
Oh, is that right?
Worked at the KSDP for a year or so.
Oh, before, big 1500
yep,
here.
And then off I went to St. Louis. But tell us about you, Dick.
Well, like you say, I'm a musician, really kind of in my heart of hearts. But if you can imagine how difficult it is now to have a career as a musician, it was still even kind of difficult back in 1975. And my brother, Tom, went to a radio school here in the Twin Cities. Back then it was called Brown Institute. And he was musically inclined and ended up getting a radio station gig at WCKL in Catskill, New York. And so I just followed in his footsteps.
You've got great pipes.
Well, thank you.
Now, did you always have this voice even when you were like 12 years old?
Yeah, it didn't happen as quickly as our dear departed friend Don LaFontaine claims happened to him overnight. It happened to me over a summertime.
Good old Don, in a perfect world.
Oh, he did.
Hey, Dick, we're going to be talking to you more, but I just wanted everybody who has been affiliated with this program for so many years just to hear you and welcome you aboard, and we just look forward to many years with you.
Well, I thank you for the privilege. Really appreciate it, George. I used to be a nighttime a radio announcer in the Midwest, various places, and of course, radio at all day parts is about relationships, but especially at night because listeners are just so very attentive and very loyal, and I consider this a privilege.
Super. Dick Hravosti, and you're going to hear more of Dick's voice during all our programs on Coast to Coast AM. You know, as I was reporting last week, chin implants are now the fastest growing cosmetic surgery procedure. People in the thousands are getting chin implants. But did you know there are many botched surgeries and very strange plastic surgeries?